"I'm entitled to half," my sister said, sitting across the mediation table in a blazer that probably cost more than I'd spent on groceries that entire month. "I'm his daughter too." I looked at her, really looked at her, and thought about the 11 months since Dad's stroke. 11 months of feeding tubes and physical therapy schedules, and 3 a.m. calls when he'd forgotten how to swallow safely and started choking on water. 11 months where Amanda had visited exactly twice, both times for under an hour, both times leaving before dinner because she had somewhere to be. "Half of what, Amanda?" I asked. "Half of the $187,000 I personally spent keeping him alive and safe? Or half of what's left after that?" "Don't be dramatic, Renee. He's our father. The estate isn't yours just because you decided to play nurse." Play nurse? That's what she called 2 years of my life. 2 years where I'd quit a job I loved, where my husband and I had gone to marriage counseling because I was never home, where I'd learned to change a colostomy bag and manage a feeding pump, and recognize the early signs of aspiration pneumonia, not because I wanted to, but because nobody else would. "You didn't lift a finger," I said quietly. "Not once. Not when he fell. Not when he had sepsis. Not when I hadn't slept in 4 days straight." "That was your choice," Amanda said. "Nobody forced you." She was wrong about that. Dead wrong. And in 6 weeks, a judge would tell her exactly how wrong she was, using words and documents and a piece of paper Dad had signed 18 months earlier that Amanda didn't even know existed. Backstory, setup. My name is Renee Castellano. I'm 44 years old, married to my husband James for 16 years, with one daughter, Isabel, who was 15 when this story really began. Before all of this, I worked as a dental hygienist at a practice in Fort Collins, Colorado, a job I'd held for 12 years and genuinely loved. My father, Walter Hutchins, was 79 when his health began its serious decline. My mother, Diane, had passed in 2019 from complications of diabetes, and after that, Dad lived alone in the same house I'd grown up in, stubbornly independent, still driving himself to the grocery store, still mowing his own lawn at 77 years old, because he refused to act like an old man. My sister, Amanda Hutchins Reyes, is 2 years younger than me, 42, a real estate agent, married to a man named Victor, who runs a successful contracting business. They live about 35 minutes from Dad's house, closer than I do actually, since I'm nearly 50 minutes away. But distance was never really the issue with Amanda. Availability was. In November 2023, Dad suffered a hemorrhagic stroke while working in his garage. A neighbor found him, unconscious, on the concrete floor, and called 911. By the time I got to Poudre Valley Hospital, Dad was in the ICU, and the neurologist, Dr. Farah Nasser, explained that he had significant damage to his left hemisphere, expressive aphasia, right side weakness, and swallowing dysfunction so severe that he'd need a feeding tube, at least temporarily, possibly permanently. There was no family meeting where we divided responsibilities. I want to be clear about that because it matters enormously for what happened later. Amanda showed up at the hospital that first night, cried in the hallway, told me she just couldn't handle hospitals, they make her physically sick, and left before Dad was even moved out of the ICU. I stayed. I stayed because someone had to, and because in that moment, staying didn't feel like a decision, so much as an instinct. Over the following weeks, as Dad moved from the ICU to a rehabilitation facility, the pattern set itself in place, without anyone ever formally agreeing to it. I was the one who met with his care team every Tuesday and Thursday. I was the one who learned to interpret his aphasia, the halting, effortful way he'd try to form words, sometimes getting only fragments out, wah wah water, or ho home, because I was the one who was there enough to learn his new language. I was the one who signed the paperwork, made the medical decisions in consultation with his doctors, and eventually, in March 2024, brought him home with a full care plan that essentially became my second full-time job. Amanda's involvement, by contrast, followed a predictable script. I'm swamped with the Hendrickson listing this week. Can you handle the care conference? Then, Victor's parents are visiting. It's just not a good week. Then, as the months wore on, the excuses stopped being about specific events and became a general, almost bored refusal. I just don't do well with this kind of thing, Renee. You're so much better at it than I am. By summer 2024, my life had reorganized itself entirely around my father's needs. I left my job at the dental practice. Not immediately, but in stages, dropping from full-time to 3 days a week, and finally, by August, leaving altogether because Dad's care had become too unpredictable to manage around any employer's schedule. That decision cost me roughly $52,000 a year in lost income, plus the employer-sponsored health insurance James and I had relied on, which we then had to replace with a private plan costing us an additional $9,600 annually. I managed Dad's feeding tube schedule, 6 times a day, precisely timed, because aspiration risk with his particular swallowing dysfunction was severe enough that Dr. Nasser had been explicit about the danger of any deviation. I coordinated physical therapy 3 times a week, occupational therapy twice a week, speech therapy for his aphasia twice a week. I hired a home health aide, a kind, patient woman named Gretel, for 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, at $26 an hour, because I still needed some hours to sleep, to see my own daughter, to remain married to my husband in more than name only. I paid for a significant portion of Gretel's wages myself, roughly $1,300 a month out of my own pocket, because Dad's Social Security and small pension covered his mortgage, utilities, and medical co-pays. But not much beyond that, and asking Amanda to contribute always produced the same response. I'll send something when the market picks back up. Real estate's been brutal this year. Nothing ever came. I remember a specific exchange, in June 2024, that crystallized exactly how alone I'd become. I texted the family group chat, just Amanda and me, since our parents' families were otherwise thin, asking for help covering a $340 copay for a swallow study Dad needed. Me: hey, Dad needs a repeat swallow study. Insurance is only covering 70%. Can you send $170 for your half? Amanda: ugh, things are tight right now with Victor's business slow season. Can you front it? I'll pay you back. She never paid me back. Not that $17, not anything, not once, in the 18 months that followed, but she always had time to ask, every few months, almost casually, so how's Dad's house looking, value-wise? Victor thinks the market in that neighborhood's about to jump. I should have seen it then for what it was. I didn't yet. I was too tired to see much of anything beyond the next feeding schedule, the next therapy appointment, the next crisis, rising conflict come home. The moment that changed everything, the moment I stopped being able to pretend Amanda's absence was a temporary phase, happened in January 2025. Dad developed a fever on a Wednesday evening. I checked his temperature, 101.4. By Thursday morning, it had climbed to 103.1, and he was disoriented in a way that went beyond his usual aphasia-related confusion. I called his primary care doctor, who told me to get him to the ER immediately, suspecting aspiration pneumonia, a serious risk given his swallowing dysfunction, and potentially life-threatening for a stroke patient his age. At the ER, they confirmed it. Aspiration pneumonia, plus early signs of sepsis, with a white blood cell count that alarmed the attending physician enough that Dad was admitted to the ICU for IV antibiotics and close monitoring. I sat in that ICU for the better part of 4 days, sleeping in a recliner chair, calling James each night to check on Isabel, missing an entire week of what little income I still had left from occasional per diem hygienist shifts. I texted Amanda the first night, Dad's in the ICU, aspiration pneumonia, possible sepsis. This is serious. Her response came 6 hours later. Oh no, that's scary. Keep me posted. I have a closing tomorrow, I can't move. She didn't call. She didn't visit. Not on day 1, not on day 2, not through the entire 4-day admission. On day 3, when Dad's fever finally broke and the sepsis markers began improving, I texted an update, and Amanda replied, So glad he's better. I was so worried, as if worry alone constituted presence. When Dad was discharged, exhausted and weaker than before, needing an adjusted care plan and additional monitoring for the following weeks, I finally called Amanda directly, needing to talk about this like the adults we were supposed to be. I need actual help, I said. Not sympathy texts. I need you to take even 1 day a week, or contribute financially in a real, consistent way. I am running on nothing, Amanda. I haven't had a full night's sleep in over a year. There was a pause, long enough that I thought the call had dropped, and then Amanda said the words I will never forget. Renee, nobody made you quit your job. Nobody made you become his full-time caregiver. You chose that. You've always needed to be the one in control, the responsible one. I'm not going to feel guilty for not sacrificing my career the way you did. I didn't choose this because I wanted control, I said, my voice shaking. I chose it because you weren't there, and somebody had to be. That's not fair, she said. You have no right to guilt-trip me for living my own life. I sat in my car in Dad's driveway afterward, gripping the steering wheel, feeling something crack open in my chest that had been holding steady for over a year. By that point, I calculated, because by then I'd started keeping records almost instinctively, some professional habit from years of medical charting at the dental office, that I had spent just over $61,000 of my own money on Gretel's wages, medical co-pays, home modifications like a hospital bed and a wheelchair ramp, and incidental costs that added up faster than anyone who hadn't lived it could imagine. Amanda's contribution, over 14 months, totaled $0. Not one payment, not one overnight stay, not one missed therapy appointment covered so I could rest. And yet, every few weeks, the same question, wrapped in different words. Has Dad talked about the house at all? Victor and I have just been curious what it's worth these days. Climax, betrayal, reveal. By spring 2025, Dad had stabilized somewhat. Still aphasic, still requiring the feeding tube for thickened liquids, though he'd regained some ability to eat soft foods by mouth, still needing daily care, but no longer in acute crisis. It was around this time that Amanda's interest in the estate transformed from occasional casual questions into something far more direct. She called me on a Sunday in April, and within 30 seconds of pleasantries, pivoted sharply. So I've been thinking, she said. We should probably talk to a lawyer about updating Dad's will, make sure everything's clear for both of us. Both of us, I repeated. Amanda, I've put over $65,000 of my own money into his care at this point. I've given up my career. I'm not sure both of us is quite the framework here. He's my father too, Renee. I'm entitled to half of whatever he leaves, regardless of who did what. That's how inheritance works. I remember the silence that followed, because I genuinely didn't know how to respond to something so nakedly transactional. You didn't do anything, I finally said. Not one thing. Not a single overnight. Not a single dollar. Not a single therapy appointment. And you think you're entitled to the same share as me? That's not fair, Amanda snapped. The same phrase. Always the same phrase. Whenever facts became inconvenient. You wanted to be the one in charge. You can't have it both ways, playing the martyr and then acting shocked that I still have a legal claim. Then, 3 weeks later, came the moment that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. Amanda and Victor hired an attorney, not to discuss the will amicably, but to send a formal letter raising what they called concerns regarding potential undue influence in any estate planning I might be involved in, given my sole control over Dad's finances and daily life. The letter suggested that my role as his primary caregiver and, since March 2024, his agent under a financial power of attorney, created an inherent conflict of interest that warranted independent legal review before any estate documents could be considered valid. I sat at my kitchen table reading that letter 3 times before the words fully landed. They were accusing me, essentially, of manipulating our father for financial gain. Me, the one who had spent 17 months of my life, over $65,000 of my own money, given up a career I loved, sacrificed sleep, my marriage's stability, and time with my own daughter, keeping our father alive, safe, and cared for through a stroke, a bout of sepsis, and a slow, grinding recovery that most families never see up close. "You have no right to act innocent here," Amanda said, when I called her, my voice breaking with a fury I'd never directed at my own sister before. "If you've got nothing to hide, you shouldn't be worried about a lawyer looking at things." "I have every receipt," I said. "Every single one, going back to the day he had his stroke." "That's exactly what someone would say if they were trying to look clean," she said. I hung up the phone and cried harder than I had in the entire 17 months prior, not from exhaustion this time, but from something closer to grief. Grief for the sister I thought I'd had, who had apparently disappeared the moment showing up stopped being convenient, replaced by someone who saw our father's decline as nothing more than an asset waiting to be divided. Turn twist, I want to tell you I panicked, and for about 2 days, I did. Then something in me settled into a focus I recognized from years of precise, careful work, the same steadiness I'd once brought to reading X-rays and charting periodontal measurements, now redirected toward defending myself and honoring what my father actually wanted. I hired an elder law attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Attorney Priya Rajan, recommended by Dr. Nasser's office, who had seen cases like this before. I brought her everything. Every receipt for Gretel's wages, dating back to March 2024, totaling over $31,000 paid directly from my personal account. Every medical copay statement showing my payments, never Amanda's. Bank statements showing money flowing exclusively from me to Dad's household and medical expenses, never the reverse. Never a cent moving in any direction that could suggest exploitation. A detailed caregiving log I'd kept, almost obsessively, documenting every feeding schedule, every therapy session, every fever, every hospital visit, every night I'd slept in a recliner instead of my own bed. And critically, I had something Amanda didn't know existed. In March 2024, shortly after Dad came home from rehab, while his aphasia was improving, and Dr. Nasser had conducted and documented a formal cognitive capacity assessment confirming he retained the ability to understand and execute legal documents, Dad had asked me to bring him to see an estate attorney, alone, without Amanda present, at his own explicit request. In that meeting, Dad, slowly, laboriously, using a communication board to supplement his halting speech, had executed both a durable power of attorney naming me as his agent, and a new will, replacing an older one from 2015 that had split everything equally between Amanda and me. The new will allocated 70% of his estate to me, in recognition of the care, sacrifice, and constant presence provided by my daughter Renee since my stroke, and 30% to Amanda. Dr. Nasser's capacity assessment, dated the same week, stated unambiguously that Walter Hutchins demonstrated full understanding of the nature and consequences of the documents he was signing, despite his expressive language deficits. When Amanda and Victor's attorney received our response, the caregiving log, the financial records showing money flowing only from me, the power of attorney, the updated will, and the contemporaneous capacity evaluation, their undue influence argument collapsed within days. There was no conflict of interest to investigate. The facts, laid end to end, told an unambiguous story, but the moment that truly ended the dispute wasn't legal. It was personal. Attorney Rajan suggested a mediation session before any formal hearing, mostly to avoid a costly, public battle, and Dad insisted on attending, communicating through his aide with the communication board, and short, effortful verbal phrases. When Amanda, in that mediation room, said quietly, "I just want what's fair, Dad," he raised his good hand, slowly, with visible effort, and pointed at her, then spoke, word by halting word, each one costing him visible strain. "Fair is, Renee. You never came." The room went silent. Amanda's face crumpled, but Dad wasn't finished. With his aide's help transcribing the rest from his communication board, he added, 17 months, 2 visits. Renee gave up everything. That is not equal. That is not fair to her. Amanda didn't argue after that. She sat there, quiet, and for the first time in over a year, I saw something that looked almost like recognition cross her face. Resolution. The judge never had to fully rule on a contested hearing, because faced with Dad's own clear, documented testimony, the medical capacity evaluation, and financial records that left no room for doubt, Amanda's attorney formally withdrew the challenge before it reached trial. Judge Patricia Kwan, reviewing the settlement for approval, noted from the bench that the case represented a clear and well-documented example of a caregiver's sacrifice being appropriately and legally recognized, and that Walter Hutchins's wishes, expressed with full capacity and considerable determination despite significant communication challenges, would stand as written. Dad passed away in September 2025, 8 months after that mediation, from complications following a second, larger stroke. I was with him. Amanda arrived 40 minutes after he'd already gone, and for the first time in the entire ordeal, I felt something other than anger when I saw her. Just a tired, hollow sadness that we'd lost so much time to a fight that never should have needed to happen. The estate settled as Dad had arranged it, 70% to me, 30% to Amanda. She didn't contest it further. A few months later, she called me, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. I think I told myself it was fine to stay away, because facing how sick he was scared me, she said. It was easier to be angry about money than to admit I was a coward about everything else. I don't know if I've fully forgiven her. I don't know if I need to, in order to move forward. But I no longer need her to understand what those 17 months cost me, because I have the proof. And more than that, I have my father's own words, spoken through more effort than most people will ever know, telling the room exactly who had earned what. I think about caregiving differently now. Nobody hands you an invoice for the nights you don't sleep, the career you quietly let go of, the marriage you have to fight to keep intact, while someone else's life continues, uninterrupted, 35 minutes away. It's invisible labor, right up until there's something to divide, and then, suddenly, everyone remembers they were family all along. If you're the one keeping the feeding schedule, the one who knows the sound of a fever coming on, before the thermometer confirms it, keep every record, not because you'll need to defend yourself in court, though you might, but because the truth of what you gave deserves to exist somewhere solid, even if the people who should have thanked you never quite managed to say the words. My father did, in the end, with the only words he had left, and that was worth more than any inheritance ever could be.